Whoops, what's happening here now? 75 to 80% of the 140,000 people of the Jewish faith were murdered by Adolf Hitler. 140, 80%. The only country that had a greater loss was 98% of the Jews in Poland. One of the things I always like to do is so that you can have an association with some numbers. And there's no doubt in my mind, but that everybody is familiar with this particular horrible scene of 9/11 when 3,000 innocent people lost their lives. 3,000, how do you put your mind around that? But to give you an idea what Adolf Hitler did, you take that horrible number of 3,000 and multiply it by 2,000, and you come up with 6 million people of the Jewish faith that Adolf Hitler murdered. Incidentally, of that 6 million, over 1.1 million were kids 15 and younger. 1.1 million. Adolf Hitler, every country that he occupied, they instituted some rules that were only applicable to the people of the Jewish faith. They were called the Nuremberg Laws. There were dozens of them. And it didn't say what you could do, it only said what you could not do, which just about covered everything. Don't have time to do all of that, of course. But the thing is that I want to bring up that many of you may be familiar with, that one of the requirements for the Jewish people, and it didn't matter whether you lived in the Netherlands or you lived in Poland or you lived in Germany. Every Jewish person, when they came out of their living quarters, had to wear, sew onto their outer garment, a bright yellow star. Within that star, in the so-called Hebraic type of style of lettering, it spelled the word Jew. If you lived in France, it would say Juf. In Germany, it's a Jude. And in the Netherlands, it said Jood, J-O-O-D. I'm going to have to also show you that it was not just the adults that were required to do that. Kids up to the age of 6 years old had to wear that bright yellow star. You see a group of school children there, all of them wearing the star. I have to very quickly jump ahead now based on that statement of the star. Going to 1985, my mom was still alive. And on my visit, she lived in Southern California, I found a box of old photographs. Among them was a picture of her when she was in her early middle 20s. And as you'll see in a moment, on that coat is a star. When I flipped that picture over, there was a crumbling piece of paper. And when I opened it, there was one of these stars. I said, Mom, where did you get this? I was amazed. It was used looking, it like it ripped off or something. She says, I don't know. She says, after the war, I just ripped that off my coat. I didn't want to have any remembrance of that. This is a picture of Mom. And the actual star that you see here is the star that came off that. In Seattle, we have a Holocaust Center for Humanity, a museum, and a few years ago, I donated that picture and that star. Not a replica, it is the actual real thing. Mom, Dad, and I, we lived in a 4-story old building, walk-up apartment. And one of the first things that I remember looking out the window, by the way, I'm only 7 years old now, looking out the window and seeing German soldiers stopping people and asking for identification. They didn't break any laws. They were just stopped, groups of them. And then many of them were put on trucks and they disappeared. Nobody knew where they went. No idea. Somebody's mother, father, and uncle, child didn't come home that night. Well, the Germans stopped people on the street. They sent notifications out that they had to report. If you did not report at a certain time, they came cracking down your door and you were arrested and you had to report to a certain place. All of a sudden, by the way, one of the clearest moments that I remember, that one night, it was dark, 10, 11 o'clock, and I'll never forget it. I repeat this every time I tell my story, and the little hair I got left, it stands on end. but it was quiet. And all of a sudden, a bunch of trucks pulled up to the front of the apartment complex. And I'll never forget these German soldiers yelling in the quiet of the night, "Alle Juden, raus! All Jews, get out!" It was followed by doors being kicked in, babies crying. They hadn't come to our door yet. I didn't know what was going on, all that noise. All I knew was the next day, several of my friends in school weren't there. All of a sudden, this started to repeat itself. People started to disappear. Mom comes to me one day, very upset, and said that one of my aunts and uncles have been arrested and they're taken away. I had no idea what that meant. It wasn't just a few weeks later. Very upset again, and she told that Oma and Opa, Grandpa and Grandma, have been arrested. What do you mean, Mom? What is arrested? How do you explain that to a kid? How do you explain that? Arrested, what does that mean? In some way, she must have said, well, look at those soldiers out there. They're taking people away. Why? And she says, no, we don't know. And then came the day that she really was upset. She was crying. She sat me down and she told me that Dad has been arrested. My dad used to like to fish. He had a 2-man rowboat. And amongst those so-called Nuremberg laws, a Jewish person was not allowed to have a boat, if you want to call that a boat, a 2-man rowboat. He went fishing on one of the canals. That was not allowed. It was in June of 1942 he was arrested, and that it was the last that we ever saw or heard of him again. More and more people started to disappear, and every country in Europe, the Western countries that were occupied by the Nazis, there were good people and bad people. At that time, it seemed like it was all bad people, all bad people. There were traitors, there were enemy sympathizers, but there were individuals who said, who are these Germans coming across the border? Who cares? Jew, Christian, Muslim, doesn't make any difference. What are they Germans coming across our border, taking our citizens away? And they formed an underground. It started with one person in one block, two in another. It was very, very primitive, but they would do things for the Jewish people that they couldn't do them for themselves. Without going into a great amount of detail, one of the most important things that they did was to find people that would be willing to shelter a person of the Jewish faith. How my mother found one of these people, because it was secret, if those people were ever caught, they'd get a bullet in the head on the spot. Very secretive, and throughout my story, that comes up a number of times. I don't know how she found this individual. We have to get out of Amsterdam. And they came up with a couple, Klaas and Rufina Post. They had a little bitty farm in the northeastern part of Holland, and they were willing to shelter Mom and I. Here is a picture of them on the right. They were a couple in their late 50s. They look older. The reason being they had a little bitty half-acre, three-quarter-acre piece of ground. They worked their fingers to the bone from sun up to sunset, raising veggies for self-sustenance. This is an actual picture of the farm. It was small. They had a couple of chickens, couple of cows, couple of pigs. And it was always so amazing to me. Then we're a Christian couple, and they didn't know us they knew that we were Jews, but so what? We were people, we were humans, and they were willing to share this hard work for veggies, food. They didn't know us from Adam. We'd never heard of them. They never heard of us. As I got older, it became even more relevant how courageous those people were. Not only did they share, they were compassionate, wonderful, decent human beings, but the mere fact that they gave us shelter became very prevalent in their deed. And what I mean to say by that is, if they, for some reason, if my mother and or I were to get caught by the Nazis, both of them, Klaas, Rufina, and their entire family would be arrested, sent to a death camp that day. So those people were absolutely magnificent. When I got loud before saying, all Jews get out, the trucks pulling up, now the Germans found out that Jews were being hidden on the farm. Now the trucks came on the farm. dozens of soldiers, all the farms in the area. They would ransack them, kicking over furniture, finding people hiding in the odd places, sometimes in a haystack with fixed bayonets. They'd stab in the haystack. Sometimes there was a kid hiding in there or an adult. And then whoever they arrested, put on a truck. Again, where did they go? Nobody knew. So it was one afternoon, class called us in one of the little bitty bedrooms. As I say, that particular farmhouse, it was old. It had no plumbing. When my mom and I got there, it was probably already then 30, 40 years old. No indoor plumbing, an outhouse to go use the toilet, no electricity. The entire floor of the farm was old knotty pine. And Klaus did an interesting thing. There were 12-inch wide board. And in two 12-inch wide areas, he took a saw and sawed a 6-foot long section right into the joints where the two boards met. When he got through with that, you could open up two 12-inch wide boards, 6 feet, and right below was this dirt of this old farm, 1.5 feet, 2 feet below. Now, when the Germans, the trucks coming down the road, we'd run in there, open up those planks, and Mom and I would jump into this hole underneath the floorboards. Klaus or Rufina would put the boards back, throw a rug on it. Did such a great job cutting it right into joint. You couldn't see anything. And Mom and I would lie body to body, could hardly breathe, 1.5 feet below the surface, with the German soldiers walking over our heads, looking, kicking furniture, opening closets, trying to find people. All it would have taken is one cough, one sneeze, one hiccup, and it would have been all over. Klaus felt even that got to be too dangerous. He decided one afternoon, he told me to get a wheelbarrow and some shovels. And next to the farm, not more than 150, 200 feet away, was a group of trees. You can't call it a forest, just a bunch of trees coming out of nowhere. And at dusk, he told me to get that wheelbarrow. And I want to emphasize that word dusk. Needless to say, when it started to get dark. My mom and I were on that little farm for almost 2.5 years. With no exception, for all of that 2.5 years, we could never come outside during daylight hours, ever. The reason being, there are other farms in the area. Needless to say, people get used to each other. And as you have in every country, you got enemy sympathizers. You got people that are traitors, whatever you want to call them. And if Mom and I would have come out, somebody might have said, hey, who are they? It became so prevalent that there were no human beings. My mom and I were not a human being anymore. We had no soul. We had no body. We could not talk to anybody. We could not function as a human being. We could get some air when it started to get dark. Away from the dirt road, I could play with some homemade toys in the back of the farm. So at one dusk evening, he told me to get the wheelbarrow. We went into this little forest, if you want to call it. And when we got to a rise in the area, we started to dig. We ended up digging a hole 3 feet wide, 3 feet tall, 6 feet deep. Klaus went out of the area and cut down some small trees, dragged them over, put them over the roof. What's like a little cave, a hole in the ground into the side of this hill. He took the branches and interwove them in front of the entrance. You kind of had to separate them to crawl in, and they'd spring back. You could stand right in front of it. It just blended in with nature. You couldn't see anything. So now when Mom and I heard the trucks coming, the German trucks coming down the road, we'd run out the back of the farm and we'd crawl into this hole. Man, did that scare me. We would barely fit in there. We just pressed against each other. It was only 3 feet wide. We could hardly breathe in there. And there's two things that really, really scared me all the time. And that was, one, every time we were in there, dirt came trickling down. I was always scared. Keep in mind, I'm not even 7.5 years old yet. Dirt kept trickling down. I was afraid it would cave in. But the other thing that I had become aware of within a year, that somebody wants to hurt me. maybe somebody wants me to die. Somebody wants to kill me, but I don't understand. What did I do? What is wrong with me? What are we doing in this hole in the ground? Where's Poppy? Where's my dad? Where's Grandma and Grandpa? What are we doing here? And the thing that scared me more than anything else, when Mom and I were quietly listening, hearing those Germans 150 feet away ransacking the farm. We could hear them, but because of the twigs in the front by the entrance, so to speak, we couldn't see them. And the thing that scared me more than anything, is it this time they're gonna come and get me? Again, what did I do? I did not understand. How do you explain that to a 7, 8-year-old? Impossible. Well, folks, I'm talking to you now. Needless to say, they never, ever came into that forest. It was in the early part of 1943 that the war started to turn around somewhat. The Allies, the Americans and the British started to run bombing raids from Great Britain, from England over to Germany to try and wipe out Hitler's war machine. They flew America-made by the Boeing Company, B-17 Flying Fortresses, 4-engine heavy bombers. When they came over in formations of up to 800-900 at a time. The noise, the drone was absolutely deafening. Those aircraft had a crew of 9. The Boeing Company and its affiliate during World War built 13,000 of them. Over a third of them were lost in combat by fighters, by anti-aircraft fire. There was a tremendous loss. As I say, it had a crew of 9, and when they got hit, not many of them got out. So the command in England decided to run those raids at night to curtail some of the material and human loss. It was one of those first night runs. I could hear them coming. As I say, it was just coincidence that the farm was right underneath the flight path that they took between England and Germany. It started to get louder. The windows started to rattle. The door shook. And I got petrified. I had to go to the bathroom, something fierce, but I was too afraid with all that racket above to go out there by myself. So I asked my mom to take me, which she did. We stepped outside of the farm. We stood in the gravel, into the dirt. The drone, the noise overhead was deafening, but you looked up, of course, you couldn't see anything. It was nighttime. Mom had a little flashlight. And just so I wouldn't trip over my own 2 feet in the dark, she turned it on so I could see where I was going. And then a strange thing happened. When she turned on that flashlight, I hit her with such force in the stomach that she doubled up and yelled out. What was that all about? My mom, I'm an 8-year-old, I hit her. What was that all about? Well, as I got a little older, and some of you can identify as we grow older, and even with adults, when you're under extreme fear, under extreme pressure, the mind does strange things sometimes. It either under exaggerates, if that's a word, or over exaggerates the condition or the situation that you're in. And in the mind of an 8-year-old, when Mom turned on that flashlight, I was sure a bomb was going to come right down that flashlight. Craziness. But that pressure and that fear. Mom and I were on that farm for 2.5 years. Many other incidents were there. We don't have time for all of it, but Mom decided after almost 2.5 years, the raids became more prevalent. One of these days we're going to get caught, and that wonderful family, Klaus, Rufina, and their entire family would get murdered as well. How she got hold of, again, one of those underground people, she did, and said, we need to get another place to hide. They did find in the city of The Hague. The Hague is the seat of government in the Netherlands, like Washington, D.C. is here. And they found the underground. How? I don't know how they did any of that. They found a couple of women in the city of The Hague. They lived in a 3-4 story walk-up apartment that were willing to let us use one of the bedrooms. I don't even remember how we got there. I remember so much about this whole event, this whole horrible part of history, my history. I don't remember how we got there, but when we did get there, I noticed something very quickly. It was so different from the farm. The women in the Netherlands, the Germans took over all production of food for the military. So the citizens were giving stamps to buy food, but the Jewish persons, of course, weren't given any. The women would barely give us some leftovers of food. They wouldn't share the food stamps. There were a number of times that mom at night disappeared for an hour, hour and a half, and she'd come back with a loaf of bread. Don't ask. I don't know. I have no idea. Where did she go? Where did she get that? But those women, they were cold every time that mom had, every time they had some dirty work to be done, whether it was cleaning the floor or the bathroom, they'd ask mom to do it. They would hardly talk to us. There was so much compassion and kindness when we were with Klaas and Rufina on that farm. None of that was exhibited here. It was very cold and strange, but we had to be thankful. After all, they did give us shelter. They did give us shelter. It was probably 6 weeks that we were there, and then mom came up with a dirty word. I call it a dirty word that I hadn't heard for a long time, and that was, Peter, you haven't been to school for 2.5 years almost. What do you mean school? I can't go to school? I'm one of them. People want to kill me. I'm going to hide. I don't know who I am. I can't go to school. She says, well, I got some false papers for you with a different last name from the underground. And if you should ever get stopped, you're not Peter Metzelaar anymore. You're now Peter Pelt. And hopefully you're not on one of those lists that they get from the government when you look up who was Jewish and not. That's how they got you. Peter Pelt. Well, what's interesting, with that name, the star came off and I went to a public school. One of the most frightening experiences that I remember, because for 2.5 years, I've been accustomed to be not seen, not heard, to not be anybody, in fear of my life. And now I'm going right into a school with a bunch of kids. Once again, the mind plays strange things. Every day for the longest time, every day I walked in, I felt in my mind that everybody pointed and say, hey, there goes one of those, one of them Jews. They didn't know who I was. I was just one of the guys. But again, the mind formulates, the fear of knowing that I cannot be who I am, a human being. Well, the first semester, quarter, whatever it was, we got our grades. And I know you guys here, you get your printouts, computer printouts, and needless to say, in those days, we didn't have those. And they had, in Dutch, what they call a rapportboekje, a report book. I still have the one, a report bookje, and if you look close, it's fading, but it still has the name, the fake name, Peter Pelt. And the other thing that it has in there, you'll notice it's got the subject matter, so I won't go into all of it, and something different from what you guys get. Instead of the, you see, it's got numerical grades. I know you guys get alphabetical grades, your A, B's, and C's, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply that anybody listening gets C's. Everybody gets A's and B's. I hear the rumbling, Okay, but anyway, they used to get numerical grades, and you see at the bottom in the middle here, there are a couple of 5s. I think that was an F- or something. Had to do with behavior. I didn't behave well. I was always scared to death, always scared that I would be discovered. Something that some of you may or may not know, and I'm going to tell you about it now, and it might be interesting for some of you to tell your family. Ask them this: which was the first country on Earth to develop a ballistic rocket, a ballistic missile for war purposes? And the answer was Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany had a young scientist by the name of Werner von Braun. When he was 21 years old, he got his PhD in physics, and he and his scientists developed a rocket called the V2. It stood 65 feet tall. It had a 2,500 pound explosive, and they fired them from the entire western coast of Europe over to England, where the bombers came from, and military bases. They even fired them to some of the big ports, Rotterdam in the Netherlands and Antwerp in Belgium. It was a devastating, devastating weapon. It wasn't very accurate, but wherever it hit, it would annihilate an entire city block. I have a picture here of one of them being fired. Again, it's a V2. And to the right, you see the German scientist, the young man, Werner von Braun, in the cities. In back of them, you see the butchers. Yes, butchers. I call them that, the hierarchy of the Nazi military. And as I say, he developed these, they fired these 2, 3 every day from various sites. Well, needless to say, it turned out that by the end of the war, the history books will show that almost 18,000 British got killed by this thing, because they did not all make it over the military bases. Some of them hit on London even. Well, the British weren't thrilled about that, and they started to try and bomb the launching facilities. And like all non-courageous heroes, the Germans built those sites, those launching sites, right within city limits, very close, to hide behind the civilian populace. So it was a very tricky thing for the Germans, for the British to try and bomb those sites. Some of them were even on the back of railroad cars where they could move them. Well, they would get the fighter planes coming over to try and wipe out those launching facilities. As soon as those British fighters came over the English Channel, and the Netherlands is right across England, it's only about 22 miles of the North Sea, the English Channel. As soon as the British came over there, the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, would intercept them, and there would be dogfights over the city. They'd try to shoot each other down. That's not something that happens very much now. In modern warfare, dogfights, you don't hear much about that. Today you got a sophisticated piece of machinery capable of 1,800 miles an hour with a highly trained pilot and its controls. All he does is hit a button and some missiles leave his wingtips, and 100 miles down the road, people get their brains blown out. Some for the good, some not. But that didn't exist in those days. So they used to have these battles that could last a half an hour, 45 minutes, and it would happen several times a week. The result of that would be that you could walk after one of these attacks, you could walk on the street and find pieces of shrapnel. What is shrapnel? They're pieces of blown up ammunition from anti-aircraft ammunition, bullets. They're jagged, they're nasty looking, they're steel, they're heavy. And now comes a strange, strange thing. Most of you are aware of, in the United States, at a certain age, a lot of the kids have what they call trading cards, right? You trade them for the NFL, National Football League, the NBA, et cetera, et cetera. Hey, Charlie, I'll trade you ho-ho-ho for ha-ha-ha, whatever. Well, no such thing existed in Europe. Probably doesn't even today. But leave it up to the crazy guys, and I say guys because the girls wouldn't be dumb enough to do this. And I wasn't one of those dummies, tell you the truth. What did the guys do after one of those raids? We'd walk around the streets and look for and pick up these pieces of shrapnel. And the next day in school, we would trade them. Hey, Charlie, take a look at this funny one. I'll trade you that one for the. Are you kidding me? Exploded ammunition we would trade. Well, it was on a Sunday afternoon that my mom, where we were hiding in that apartment with these women, was only a block from a park. Mom took off the Star and we walked to the park. We no sooner got to the park and the air raid siren. This is on a Sunday, the air raids, meaning the British on the way over, The Germans going to intercept all, you know what, it's going to break loose. Everybody ran into these underground concrete bomb air raid shelters, stinky, smelly air raid shelter. You could hear the rat-a-tat of machine guns, bombs exploding, but it was safe. It was frightening, but it was safe. After 45 minutes or so, the all clear sounded, and we walked out. Now, to keep in mind, this is on a Sunday. We just had one of these raids. I'm going to be looking for pieces of shrapnel to train in school the next day. And I remember I was holding my mom's hand. I was wearing red knobby gloves, all the crazy things to remember. Red gloves, but I remember it had little knobbies on, I don't know, whatever that meant. And I'm looking for shrapnel. And I look ahead, folks, and about 20 feet in front of me is a piece of shrapnel I had never seen before. It was humongous. It was like 3 times the size of these 3 pieces put together. It was nasty looking, but all I could think of, man, I'm going to be a big shot in school. Nobody's ever seen anything this big. And if they want to trade me for that, they'd have to give me everything they ever collected. I pull away from Mom and I run over to this thing. It took 2 hands to pick it up. It was heavy. And I remember that heat, even though I was wearing gloves, heat came through my gloves, but I didn't care. I never seen a big chunk like that, and I'm going to be a big shot in school. I just know. I was so proud of this thing. I showed Mom, and she takes one look at it. I don't know what she was thinking, but she takes her hands underneath mine holding this thing and makes me heave it away. It wasn't 10 seconds later when there's an explosion behind us. There's a little crater in the street, about a 10-inch square crater. I have no idea what it was that I picked up, but whatever it was live. It exploded. My only regret was I wasn't going to be a big shot in school the next day. I wouldn't be talking to you here either. If Mom wouldn't have made me throw that away. There was a meeting called by Adolf Hitler and his henchmen in the city of Wannsee, south of Berlin. And they got their politicians and the generals together. And in an hour and 20-minute meeting, they came up with what today in the history books is referred to as the final solution, how to eradicate every person of the Jewish faith from the face of Europe and eventually from this earth. When that happened, these raids I keep telling you about, 24/7 around the clock, whether in the farmland, whether in the city, as they're arresting people on trucks, disappear. Again, even then, nobody knew what happened to these people, what happened to their dad, their father, their uncle, their mother, whomever. Nobody knew. Well, those women got very scared, the ones that let us use one of their rooms that hid us. They got afraid because of all of these raids that we would get caught, and because they gave us shelter, they would be arrested and sent to a death camp. How my mother found out is probably the greatest question I asked her more times. She didn't remember, didn't want to remember. I have no idea. But Mom found out those women were going to turn us in. They were too afraid we'd get caught and it would be the end of them. We had to get out of there. How Mom got hold of these underground people, I just don't understand. I just had no idea, but she did. And they came up with a small one-room apartment back in Amsterdam. Well, the city of The Hague and Amsterdam, it's only about 45 minutes apart. However, in those days, there was only one highway connecting the two. However, no civilians allowed. It was used strictly for the German military, tanks, artillery, troops movement. I wake up one night and Mom is sitting at a candlelight at a table with a bunch of bed sheets. She is sewing. I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Go back to sleep." I wake up, I don't know, 2-3 hours later, and she wraps this contraption she made around. She made a skirt, she made a top with buttons, and she had a little hat. She made a nurse's uniform by hand, sewing out of bed sheets. When I woke up, it must have been 2 in the morning or whatever. She says, get dressed, we have to leave here. She bundled, it was wintertime, she bundled me up, bundled herself up. She wrapped this contraption, this nurse's uniform around herself, and we tippy-toed out of the apartment. We had no belongings. As we're trudging through the snow, I said, Mom, where are we going? She says, don't talk, Peter, just keep going. We walked for about another 3 miles, and now, by the way, I'm going on to 10 years old. All of a sudden, I realized something. I said, Mom, we're not going to that highway, are we? She says, Peter, we got to get to Amsterdam. I said, we can't do that. Those are the guys that want to kill us. They're German troops, the military, no civilians, let alone who we are. She says, just be quiet. We get to the highway and my heart is jumping out of my chest. Troops, German troops marching, tanks, artillery on flatbed trucks. I mean, this is the enemy and we're, oh my gosh. Now Mom does something when the expression goes, I know the doo-doo is gonna hit the fan. She turns sideways, sticks out her thumb, and puts up the sign of hitchhiking. I said, Mom, what are you doing? She says, don't speak, Peter, be quiet. It wasn't 5 minutes and a big flatbed truck stopped and an SS officer gets out. The SS were the ones in the black uniforms, the worst of the worst. They're the ones that had the skull and crossbones on their hat, on their uniform. And this SS officer gets out, starts to read Mom the riot act. What are you doing here with a child? No civilians allowed. This is for the fatherland, blah, 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 whatever. I have no idea why, but the guy even gave Mom a chance to explain. And here was his story. Listen to this closely. She said, sir, you know about the British bombing the V2 rocket sites? Yeah. Ich weiß es das. I know that. So, well, just the other day, one of the British bombs went astray, I guess, and it hit the apartment. The kid here pointing at me was living, and it killed his father and it killed his mother. And as you can see, I'm a nurse with the International Red Cross, and I'm taking him to Amsterdam to go to a home. The guy gave her a strange look, and he grabbed Mom by the arm. I'm hanging on to her, and he walks her over to the cab of the truck, and he separates her from me. Now I think it's all over. He helps my mother. And keep in mind, all she said, she's taking this kid to an orphanage, to a home in Amsterdam. He helps Mom into the cab of the truck next to the driver. He comes out, he picks me up, walks to the back of the truck, puts me in the back of the truck in the snow. He walks back to the cab of the truck, gets in. Mom is sitting between the two Nazi officers. I'm sitting by myself in the snow in the back. Are you ready for this? They took us to Amsterdam. They took us where we wanted to go. How did Mom come up with this? How did she come up with this convoluted plan? The guys basically that belonged to those that wanted to murder us, they're the ones that took us where we had to go. I'm sorry, every time I get very excited about it. To this day, I don't understand. How did she ever come up with that? While in Amsterdam, and when we got there, there was no fuel to be had. The Germans, again, all coal for heating was taken. There was no food. All the trees around the canals, everything was cut down. There was no wood. You couldn't even boil water and take a turnip and dip it in there and call it soup. But about 2 blocks, not even 2 blocks from this one room apartment, was an old high school, and the Germans took it over as one of the headquarters in Amsterdam. And one day the Brits came over and leveled the place, bombed the you-know-what out of it. The result was rubble with splintered wood. The next day, me included, hundreds of people picking up these pieces of wood that could create some boiling water to make tea, to soup, to heat the room you were in. I mean, it was like finding gold. And as all these people are scrounging on there, all of a sudden everybody runs away. I did too. I didn't know why. Everybody was hiding in different areas. Turned out there were some German officers coming by, and you better not get caught, you know. What used to be one of the headquarters, but people were desperate. As soon as they passed, everybody went back. Probably wasn't more than 10 minutes. The same thing happened. Everybody ran away. Well, not everybody. I didn't. I don't know if I was too involved with the juicy 2x4. I don't know. But everybody ran away. But I looked up ahead, and about 30 feet in front of me was the lady that I recognized who lived in the room apartment right next to ours. And she is waving me to get out of there as she is running away. She keeps looking back at me and tries me to go away. I don't know what she's talking about. I get up, and all of a sudden I'm grabbed by the collar, and I'm dangling on the fist of a Nazi officer. Well, I mentioned, you know, when we were on the farm with Classroom Fina, we were never hungry. You know, there was always food. But those 8 or 9 months we were in the city of The Hague, I was starving. I was underfed, skinny legs, you name it. And here's this brave soldier, right, with a little kid. I'm kicking my legs. Then he pulls a gun out of his waistband, puts it to my head. And he says, I give you 10 seconds. Well, I'm old enough to not ask what's going to happen in 10 seconds. I mean, here's an adult, you know, with a frightened kid. Well, he dropped me. And when he did, he never shot. He never took a shot at me. He wanted to scare me. But when he dropped me, my skinny legs, I can guarantee I could have won the Olympic gold in the 100 to 200, the mile, you name it. You never saw a kid run that fast. However, I was too afraid to go directly home. Reason being, I was afraid to be followed. So I, instead of being back home in 5 minutes, maybe, probably took me 15 minutes to get home because I went through people's backyards and alleys. The sad part about all of that was the lady that tried to hustle me out of there, the neighbor, went over to Mom's apartment, knocked on the door and said, Ellie, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to tell you this. I just watched it. They got Peter. Oh my God. That's all that had to happen. Losing the whole family. The only thing I know, brothers or sisters, she was just living for me. And now to be told that I'm a goner, I just can't imagine what that must have done. So here I come 20 minutes later. I'm knocking on the door. Mom opens the door. She was still hysterical, thinking that I was a goner. And I'm telling you, I've never been squeezed so hard in my life for her to recognize the fact that that I was still alive. Well, it was on May the 5th, 1945, that the Canadians liberated the Netherlands. The war was over. Nobody in my family returned. Nobody returned. We tried to adjust to a so-called free and more normal life for 4 more years. And when I was 13 and a half in 1949, I immigrated to the United States. When we came to the West Coast, I didn't speak much English. And people knew a little bit about when I got to high school. They knew a little about this, a little about that. I never talked much about it. Why? Doesn't this happen to everybody? I don't think so. I never talked much about it, but that changed. And it was actually, if you think of it, I'm 85 now. It wasn't until I was 58 years old that I started to talk about my experience. And the reason was I had a son who at the time was transferred and was living, he and his wife, in Brussels, Belgium. It's the country just south of the Netherlands. And he invited my wife and I to come over for the holidays. I'd never been back. Well over 50 some years, never been back to Europe, to the Netherlands. Went to school here. I was in the US Army here. And when he called up and said, I was so excited because all of these years, I always thought, whatever happened to those dear, dear people, Klaas and Rufina and that little farm. And then I got the sick feeling. I had no idea where in the Netherlands that farm, where was it? What village, what town? My mom was quite ill at the time. She didn't remember, and I kept pushing her. And then she came up with a name, the Veneburen. And when she mentioned that name, I recognized it somehow out of the depths. It was the name of the dirt road that the farm was on. Where, Mom? What town? She didn't know. What am I going to do? Go to a foreign country and ask them about a dirt road? I went to the library, looked at all those names. Nothing looked familiar to me. There was one name, Mackinga. Nah, I repeated it to myself. Nah, it's really, I don't know why I picked it out. It didn't mean anything. I asked my mom, it didn't mean anything to her. That's all we had to go on. We flew to Europe. We spent a week in Belgium, had a wonderful time. And then we drove from Brussels to Amsterdam. It's only about a 2.5 hour drive. It was thrilling. I still spoke the language just a little bit. I could read some of the advertising signs. It was a big, big thrill. And we became tourists. We became tourists. You know, we took the canal cruise, went to the famous Rijksmuseum. And of course, we went through and visited the Anne Frank house, the actual house where she was arrested. By the way, to some of you, many of you no doubt have read the Diary of Anne Frank. And after all of these years, and you know, it was Anne and 7 other people that were in hiding in the attic. And to this very day, it is still discussed, and books are still written as to how did they get arrested, who betrayed them, who betrayed the hiding place. It's still a matter of conjecture. Well, Anne, of course, eventually ended up in a German concentration called Bergen-Belsen, where at the age of 15, she died 2 weeks before liberation of typhoid fever. Anyway, we became spent a whole day, several days in Amsterdam. And then we had another day, maybe another hour and a half to go to this Mackinga, which was silly. It didn't mean anything to me. Anyway, we drove, there was a little sign, Mackinga off the highway. We drove into this quaint village. My son was driving and I said, pull up, there's a little bank on the corner there. I feel so embarrassed. I'm going to ask somebody about a dirt road. Can you imagine? My wife, myself, my son, and my daughter-in-law, we walk into the bank. A lady says, can I help you? I said, yeah, I'm very embarrassed to ask you this. I said, we're from the United States. And I said, have you ever heard of a dirt road called the Veneburen? And I got that out of my mouth and I was ready to tuck my tail between my legs. I was so embarrassed. And she said, sir, did you say the Veneburen? I said, yes. She says, it's 5 minutes from here. I said, no, oh my God, no, really? 5 minutes from here. I mean, I can't explain it to you. It was a very emotional thing. My son, my daughter-in-law, and my wife and I, we were hugging, we were crying that we had found something we didn't even know where we were. And in my case, of course, stepping back into my own history of almost 60 years, we were sniffling and crying, making such a racket. It was a very small bank. The manager came out, he probably thought it was a holdup or something. Anyway, he asked us to come into his office. And then I asked him, I said, you know, it's a silly question. I prefaced it so. I said, have you ever heard of the Klassen-Rufina Post family? He says, of course I have. I said, no way. I said, how did you know them? He says, well, even the manager before me, he says, they used to bank here. I said, oh my God. I said, what happened to them? Well, I should have known. I mean, I did know. And of course, he mentioned, I mean, this was, by the way, in the fall of 1992. And they said it was in the early 80s that they both passed away. I tell you, I get to that part every time and it just rips me up. It really does. Because all I can think of, why didn't I go why didn't I go back sooner? Give him a hug. Thank you for saving my life. You know, regret is a terrible thing. Terrible thing. I can't bring him back, and I guess I'll always live with that. Anyway, he drew a little map of this Feyenoord dirt road, and he says, you know, I don't know personally the people that live on that farm. It's still there. It probably looks a little different than when you were here as a kid. And we drove over there, and we get onto this dirt road, and we go up about a quarter of a mile. My son was driving, and I said, oh my heavens. I said, there it is. I recognized the farm. It had new paint, new roof, new barns, a lot of foliage. After all, it had almost been 60 years. And we knocked on the door. Turned out nobody was home. The one thing I was hoping to do is to go inside and see if those planks on the floor that Mom and I hid underneath, if those were still there. Kind of an unlikely thing after 60 years. We spent this whole day down there. I walked to the back of the farm where I used to be able at dusk play for some homemade toys. It wasn't the strangest feeling. It was like like I was 7 years old again. Anyway, I said, I want to go into that little, this was in December. It was pretty frosty. I want to go into those trees and see if there's some remnant of the cave. We go in there, and for some reason we split up. I go one way, my family goes another way looking, and every time there's a little rise in the ground, I step on the dirt to see if there's a soft spot where that cave might have been at that time. We weren't there for 5 minutes. And all of a sudden, maybe 40 feet away, my son calls out, Dad, come here, I found it. And folks, believe it or not, there was the cave like I left it almost 60 years ago. It didn't have the twigs in the front anymore, but there it was. Oh my God, the place that we were scared that we were going to get murdered by the Germans, that we would get discovered, and actually saved our life in there. It was very, very emotional. I had a little screwdriver on my keychain, and on this picture on the left here, I'm carving my mom and my initials in this log here. Unbelievable. We spent the day there. I just couldn't believe that we found it. We drove back to Belgium that night, and something I wanted to do all my life. And people said, what are you, some kind of a nut? And I said, yeah, just ask my wife. Of course I am. And that was, if I ever had a chance, I wanted to visit a Nazi concentration camp. My son had made some arrangements, and a week after we got back from the Netherlands, we flew on LATA Airlines over to Poland, to the city of Krakow. Beautiful, beautiful 1,000-year-old medieval city. However, a 20-minute drive outside of this beautiful medieval city was the largest, and excuse my wording now, the most inhumane piece of hell that man ever created on earth for a man, called Auschwitz-Birkenau. Auschwitz-Birkenau was one of 5 camps that was used and built for only one purpose, and that is genocide, to wipe out people, to murder people. The Germans had thousands of camps throughout Europe for all kinds of purpose, but only 5 of them that actually were used for killing. The railroad tracks that you see there, that picture that you see there, the tunnel, those are the pictures that you usually see in your history books. The railroad tracks came from Europe. And by the way, this was one of the entrants. It's still the original one. Arbeit macht frei. Work sets you free. Yeah, right. The railroad tracks came from Europe. People that were arrested, where nobody knew where they went, on the trucks, they were taken to stations, put on cattle cars that would hold maybe 50, 60 head of cattle. They'd put 100 people on there with one hole, a foot by a foot, with barbed wire for air. No food, no water, no toilet facilities. Sometimes, depending what country they were arrested in on their way to Auschwitz, some of them were on a train for 1 or 2 days. By the time they came to Auschwitz, some of them had died already. They didn't even survive the trip. All of these came through The picture I had found, which was kind of an emotional one that I had to put in after, I only put it in about 4 months ago, is this picture here. In the Netherlands, there was a camp called Westerbork. Every Jew that was arrested in Westerbork, in the Netherlands, was sent to Westerbork. It was like a deportation camp. But from there, they went to Auschwitz. And this was a picture of people being loaded on between 1942 and 1943 from Westerbork to Auschwitz. I like to think so, and then I don't. But it is the same time frame that my dad got arrested. And who knows, he could have been amongst these people. I know it's an emotional thing. But anyway, when those trains got to Auschwitz, people got separated in what they call the area of selection. These lines could be a mile long. Those trains kept coming 24/7. You see the tunnel that they came through. People were separated. The old people and the young women with babies on one side, men that could work on the other side. And they just pointed right or left. If you went left, the younger people went into the slave labor camp. Most of them would not survive more than 3 weeks. They were given 1 square piece of bread a day and a couple of sips of water a day. For some reason, the old people were told something different. You've been on a train, you got lice on you, you got to take a shower. Probably didn't sound so bad what all those people had to go through, pulled away from their country, their village, their family, not knowing why they are there, what were they doing there. Shower probably didn't sound bad, and they were led to an underground concrete bunker. They had several of them, 6 of them as a matter of fact, that would hold anywhere from 500 to 3,000 people. And when they got to the underground bunker, before they went inside, they were given a towel. You're going to take a shower. That sounded good. They came inside and they looked up at the ceiling and there were a shower head, no panic. And then they were all told to remove their clothes, hang it on the hooks. Be sure you remember the number after you shower to take your clothes back. When they were giving those instructions, the metal door shut behind them. Panels opened up in the ceiling. There were some soldiers on the roof that dropped some canisters of pellets called Zyklon B. There were cyanide pills. All hell broke loose. People screaming, choking, coughing, scratching on the walls, trying to get away. Between 2 and 3 minutes, depending of which one of those places they were, between 500 and another 3,000 people lay dead. Those were the gas chambers. I have a picture of one of them, one of the smaller ones that they put people into. And like I say, they had large ones that held up to 3,000 people. We're running a little short on time. I'm going to jump a little to modern day. You all seen the word propaganda. It's misleading information to promote particular cause or point of view. That is when certain people take advantage of people that don't use their minds, don't think. Propaganda works, folks. It really works. Let me show you a statement. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. That is propaganda. You tell them enough lies often enough and believe it. And if you don't think that that particular thing works, Germany, Adolf Hitler had a minister of propaganda by the name of Joseph Goebbels. He had a post with the government as a minister of propaganda. It works. Here's another thing of war. You remember the guy that developed the V-2 rocket, the young man. Well, at the end of the war, the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union tried to apprehend as many of the German butchers as they could to put them on trial. However, at least those that hadn't escaped to foreign countries, South America, including Canada and the United States. But when it came to Dr. Werner von Braun, this young scientist, he and his scientists, the United States says, hey, we won't prosecute you, but we're going to use you. Come on over. So first he is a killer, And now he is told that he can get off scot-free to the United States. And something that some of you may or may not be familiar with. Here's a picture of him in his younger days. And here he is in his later life. It was Werner von Braun, the former Nazi, and his scientists who developed the largest, most powerful rocket, the Saturn B rocket, ever built to this day. It was that rocket that sent the United States in June of 1969 to the moon. It was Werner von Braun and his scientists. I'm going to finish very quickly here, bear with me, and something that I want to really make an emphasis on. I don't know if some of you might have heard, it is hard for me to even anticipate a statement like that, but I know it exists. You may run into somebody one day, if you haven't already, that said, you know, it's a sob story, this thing, the Holocaust. The Jews just made that up. They wanted to form the new country in Israel. They made it up. Oh, really? Yeah, the Holocaust never happened. Really? Well, let me tell you, it did. Not because I was a little part of it, not because of that, but here is the most important thing. I don't know if some of you have seen pictures and know what the gentleman looked like, but there was a general in the United States Army by the name of Dwight David Eisenhower. Eisenhower was one of the few five-star generals, general of the armies. Not only was he a general, but he's the architect of the D-Day landing, the beginning of the end of World War II, and he became the 34th president of the United States. It was Dwight Eisenhower that wanted to go with his troops as they liberated some of the death camps. Now, I want to emphasize those so-called deniers that I hope you never run into, because those people, they just show their ignorance. They're bigots, they're hate mongers, they're racist, they spread untruths based on opinions, discarding facts. Now, they may say it's my opinion, it never happened. Well, you certainly have your right to your opinion, but don't make it a fact. A fact is borne out by evidence, evidence that is documented. And man alive, has that event been documented. It is considered to be one of the most documented events in man's history. Here is a picture of Dwight Eisenhower with reporters and other soldiers. At the end of I'll read to you, that came with that picture. At the end of World War II, General Eisenhower made a decision to personally visit as many Nazi concentration camps as he could. He wanted to document the camps and their appalling conditions. The amazing thing, folks, to me is that this man, 75 years ago, made this reality, anticipating a time when Nazi atrocities might be denied. General Eisenhower ordered the filming and photographing of camps as they were liberated. Members of the US Army Signal Corps recorded it. So it is evidence. So let me just finish this. I know we're running over time. All I'm hoping for is tolerance. You know, whether you're a Jew, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Mormon, who gives a toot? We're human beings. Can't we get along? But it has to be based on independent thinking. Think for yourself. Because I tell my story because of the fact that I want people to think for themselves. Researchers, look it up. So all I can say is, folks, thank you for your time. Stay with your studies, and in some way make a difference. If you see a wrong, try to make it right, because to stand by and do nothing really is not an option. Thank you so much, everybody. Stay well.
Thank you as always, Peter. Heidi, I'll let you take it from here. Thank you. So teachers, if students in your advisories have questions, or anyone else remote, if you have questions, if you would please enter those into the chat, and I will ask Mr. Metzelaar the questions
Any,
from and I'll just start off here. I'm wondering why you felt compelled to start uh, telling your story to students and to people.
it was really, as I mentioned, it wasn't until I was 58 years old. And the war was over. My experience was between the ages of 7 and 10 and a half, basically. And it wasn't until I'm 58 years old, after my son invited me to Europe, and I went for the first time. And I went and I found the cave and the farm, and I went to the death camp. It wasn't until that time that I started to talk about it, because it is based on truth. And this is what we're talking about. The truth go along with, too often people go along with the flow instead of really thinking for themselves. And I want to clear up falsehood, misinformation, and create awareness of what mankind is capable of doing to itself, and is still to this day doing to itself. And just to create an awareness of, there are certain similarities of today, frighteningly so, and conditions which are very similar to which led to this horrible past. And I just wanted to have people recognize the festering of hatred and what it can lead to.
Okay, we do have some questions coming in. And so the first one is, what are your thoughts on the current oppression of Black and Brown people in the United States today? And how are your experiences different or similar to social justice in America today?
Yeah, it's just the element of hatred, where there are groups of people, and we don't have to tag them. Again, you can call them ignorant, you can call them hate mongers, you can call them whatever you want, that seem to think that they are so different from the other. Let me just give you a little example. I have, in my lifetime, been working within the medical profession. And the only reason I mentioned that is because this I know for a fact. I said, if you take a pinprick and you take a Caucasian person and you take an African American person, or you take an Asian person and you prick their finger and you take that drop of blood and put it under a microscope, but you don't tell anybody who that is from, the best of scientists will not be able to tell, other than it came from a human being. So we're more alike than anybody else. And it is, again, a matter of tolerance, of expecting somebody that is different. They don't have to, so they don't pray like you, they don't look like you, they don't talk like you. So what? Live your life in the best way you can and let the others do the same.
Thank you. Um, the next question is about your faith. So, do you consider yourself a practicing Jew, and can you speak to how these experiences affected your Jewish faith?
Okay, it's an excellent question. And it's probably going to be somewhat different than what some of you may think. Yes, I consider myself a Jew. I'm not a practicing Jew. And when you mentioned the word faith, I had battled with that for a long time. And one day, quite a number of years ago, I looked at that word up, faith. And if you look up Webster's dictionary, faith, the definition is the following: the total acceptance without question of an unknown. I'm very sorry, I can't accept that. So all I can say is I try to be a decent human being, even without a practicing aspect of a religion. I tried to do the best I can, but from the standpoint of actually being involved in the day-to-day type of ceremonies, type of beliefs, I do not partake.
Thank you. And then there's one more question that I think is a really good question. What a remarkable woman your mother was.
Yeah.
And someone is asking if she also shared her stories while she was still with us. And I would go on to wonder if you ever asked her where she found the courage to do these things.
I
To help you.
appreciate, and it's a wonderful, wonderful question. And believe me, in my mind and soul, I couldn't thank anybody for my life more than them, other than Klaus and Rofina, who were a big part of that, of course. But the easiest way to answer this, and you have to consider that on a total emotional level. When I went to Holland and I found the cave, I found the farm, I relived what I did with Mom. I relived that experience of, when I told you the experience of hitchhiking with the Nazis, taking us where we wanted to go. All of that, the only thing that happened was before I came back, my mom was quite ill actually at the time. And I couldn't wait to tell her of everything that I had seen and experienced. And emotionally, I could just picture myself sitting next to her in a nursing home where she was, holding her hands, shedding a tear, expressing that I couldn't wait to tell everything I'd found. It. She didn't want to hear about it. She did not want to hear about it. Too painful, too painful. She put it out of her mind. There are a lot of things that had I not remembered them for some reason myself, the mere fact, the biggest thing that I related to before is when she found out that these women that we gave her shelter were going to turn us in. I wanted to know, how did she find that out? What, did she listen on the, I couldn't talk to her about it. There's very little that she would talk about. And I can assure you, she, for the most part, I found out a few little things, of course, but there's so many people, elderly people that experience it, especially camp survivors. And that's almost an oxymoron. If you knew, and I didn't go in any of the details of what took place in those camps, it's almost an oxymoron, a camp survivor. How did they ever survive? But many of them took their experience to the grave. They just could not speak of it. It was just too unbelievable.
Well, Mr. Metzelaar, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with us today. We really appreciate it. And we hope that maybe someday you can visit our campus in person here in Omaha. We would love to have
you next year.
Maybe hopefully next year would be great. And we want to thank for the Institute for Holocaust Education for organizing all this. I know it's a lot of work.
Our pleasure.
So thank you
for allowing us to be with you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invite and your interest. Stay healthy.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Peter, thank you very much as always.
You bet, Scott. Thanks for all your work. Appreciate it.
We'll be in touch.
All righty. Bye-bye.